Oil, black gold, the liquid promise that was meant to transform a nation. It gushed from the swamps of the Niger Delta and poured rivers of wealth into Lagos boardrooms. It built skyscrapers, bought private jets, and minted a new class of billionaires. Men who lived like kings, played politics like a game of chess, and wrapped their fortunes around the fate of Nigeria itself. But the blessing came with a curse. For every tycoon who rose, millions remained in poverty. For every champagne toast, there was a village choking on oil spills. And for a nation rich in crude, came a legacy of corruption, crisis, and squandered dreams. This is the story of Nigeria's oil boom kids, the men who rose on black gold, and the country forever changed by it. In January 1956, Oloibiri, a quiet community in the creeks of the Niger Delta, with a single strike, its soil gave birth to the black liquid that would redefine Nigeria. Within 2 decades, cocoa, palm oil, and groundnuts, once the pride of Nigeria's economy, became relics of the past. By the 1970s, Nigeria was pumping over 2 million barrels a day, and in the vaults of government, petrol dollars cascaded like never before. Oil money built bridges, skyscrapers, military budgets, and dreams of greatness. But it also fueled corruption, coups, and a dangerous addiction. For a generation of ambitious young men, this was not just oil, it was opportunity, a chance to build empires, and to crown themselves kings of Nigeria's new economy. The 1970s. Lagos was no longer just a capital, it was a stage, and oil was the spotlight. The black gold had transformed the city overnight. Military rulers held the taps, politicians courted them, businessmen hustled for contracts worth millions. Imported champagne became cheaper than bottled water. Mercedes and bourgeois cars clogged the streets. Mansions sprouted in Ikoyi and Victoria Island, built on contracts signed in smoky boardrooms and military barracks. Oil wasn't just an industry, it was a ticket, a fast pass to power, to prestige, to the good life. But beneath the glitter, a few men were thinking bigger. Not just parties, not just cars, they were building dynasties, families whose names would echo for decades. Oil traders, shipping magnates, construction barons. The boom years made Lagos sparkle, but they also deepened Nigeria's dependence on oil. And as wealth rushed into the hands of the few, millions were left waiting for a trickle that never came. The oil boom didn't just create wealth, it created titans, men who would rise from obscurity into boardrooms, and from boardrooms into legend. Chief Moshood Kashimawo Abiola, a name that carried weight. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a force. From publishing to telecoms to shipping, Abiola rode the oil wave with audacity, building one of Nigeria's largest business empires. To his supporters, he was a symbol of possibility. To his rivals, a reminder that oil wealth could buy power and even politics. Then there was Mike Adenuga. In New York, he had once driven yellow cabs just to survive. But back home, destiny called. With hustle, resilience, and charm, he secured an oil drilling license in the 1990s. That gamble turned him into one of Nigeria's most formidable moguls. And later, he would shake the nation again, not with oil, but with Globacom, the telecom giant that broke foreign dominance. Arthur Eze, the princely son of Anambra, known for his opulence, his philanthropy, and his pipeline empire, to some flamboyance, to others power. But beneath the gold chains and lavish parties was a business machine that stretched across Nigeria's oil heartlands. And then, a quieter figure, a trader named Aliko Dangote. At first, he wasn't the loudest, nor the flashiest, but while others chased parties and quick wins, Dangote mastered patience. Using oil wealth as leverage, he built his trading empire brick by brick: cement, sugar, flour, and eventually oil refineries. From the shadows of the boom, he would emerge Africa's richest man. These were the first tycoons, men who saw oil not just as fuel, but as fortune. They became symbols of ambition and reminders of how black gold could turn hustlers into kings. In Nigeria, oil was never just business. It was power, it was politics, and it was survival. From the 1970s through the 1990s, oil licenses were not earned, they were bestowed, handed out as political favors, awarded to those who stood close to generals in uniform or presidents in Aso Rock. If you were loyal, you got a license. If you were in the inner circle, you got a contract. If you were out of favor, you got nothing. For tycoons, proximity to power was everything. They became patrons and kingmakers, writing silent checks for campaigns, fueling coups in the shadows, and buying loyalty with oil money. Some businessmen turned politicians. Some politicians turned businessmen. The line blurred until it was no longer clear who ruled Nigeria: the generals with guns or the billionaires with oil. In Nigeria, to control oil was to control destiny, and those who sat at the table of power didn't just shape their fortunes, they shaped the fate of the nation. While the oil elite built mansions in Lagos, the Niger Delta drowned in silence and smoke. Villages once rich with fish and farmland were swallowed by spills. The waters turned black. The air carried poison, and the soil, once fertile, became barren. For the people of the Delta, oil was not wealth, it was a curse. Canals were replaced with pipelines. Harvest songs replaced with the roar of flesh stacks that lit up the night like false suns. Where there should have been life, there was only loss. By the 1990s, resentment boiled over. Young men, armed and angry, rose in defiance. Militant groups like MEND struck pipelines, kidnapped oil workers, and demanded justice. As the billionaires expanded their fleets of jets and yachts, the people of the Delta counted their dead. As contracts were signed in boardrooms, children played in poisoned rivers. The oil boom had created fortunes and fury, and out of that fury would come a cycle of militancy, amnesty, and politics, one that would shape Nigeria's destiny for decades to come. The 1990s marked a turning point in Nigeria's oil story. The government, flush with crude revenues but starved of trust, began awarding oil blocks to a chosen few. It was a system of patronage and opportunity. From those deals emerged a new class of oil barons. Femi Otedola, who became in the 1990s trading diesel from small depot, rose to control Zenon Petroleum. At its peak, it supplied fuel to most of Nigeria's industries, later moving into refineries and power assets. The trader had become an energy king. Mike Adenuga, the quiet hustler turned mogul, once a student driving taxis in New York. By the 90s, he had expanded corn oil into one of Nigeria's largest indigenous oil firms. Adenuga's empire stretched beyond oil into banking and telecoms, making him one of Africa's wealthiest men. And Folorunsho Alakija, a rare woman in a world dominated by men, through Famfa Oil's stake in the prolific OML 127 block, she rose into the ranks of the richest women in Africa. Her story was proof that oil wealth could withdraw not only Nigeria's economy, but its social order. By the end of the decade, oil was no longer just barrels beneath the Delta swamps. It was empires, it was international recognition, it was power. Nigeria's oil oligarchs had arrived, and their wealth would ripple far beyond the rigs. In Nigeria's oil business, fortunes were never permanent. The 1990s proved it. The Abacha years was a storm. Cronies rose overnight. granted access to oil licenses and state contracts. But when power shifted, many of those empires collapsed like sandcastles at high tide. Some names vanished with the generals who backed them. Their billions scattered in foreign accounts. Their companies hollowed out. But others, the true survivors, played the long game. Aliko Dangote diversified beyond trading into cement, sugar, and eventually oil refining itself. Mike Adenuga tightened his grip on telecoms and energy, building a fortress too large to topple. In Nigeria, oil was never just wealth. It was war. A war of access, of loyalty, of timing. The rules were simple: adapt or disappear. Only the most strategic players endured. By the 2000s, Nigeria's oil barons had outgrown the borders of the nation. They were no longer just local kings. They were global players. They bought stakes in foreign refineries. They bid for European football clubs. Their private jets traced a weekly arc: Lagos, London, New York. They dined with presidents, rubbed shoulders with royalty, and presented themselves as ambassadors of African wealth. But behind the glamour, shadows grew. Corruption scandals trailed contracts. Investigations hinted at billions siphoned through oil subsidies and offshore havens. And a question echoed louder at home: had oil truly enriched Nigeria, or only a few Nigerians? Today, the oil tycoons of Nigeria stand as symbols of paradox, ambition and audacity, fortune and fragility, power and profound inequality. From oil, the built banks that now dominate Africa, telecoms that connected millions, empires of glass towers and private jets. But in the creeks of Niger Delta, villages still live in the shadow of gas flares. Children drink from rivers that once fed their grandparents, now poisoned with crude. For every skyscraper in Lagos, there is a community in Bayelsa or Ogoni that asks, was the price worth it? As the world turns away from fossil fuels, chasing clean energy and new frontiers, Nigeria faces a reckoning. What happens when black gold no longer buys influence? When the wells dry and the world stops listening? The oil boom kids were not just businessmen. They were architects of modern Nigeria, builders of empires, breakers of trust, and dreamers of impossible wealth. Their legacy is both triumph and caution, a reminder that oil can gild a nation in riches, but also chain it in shadows. One day, oil will run dry, the rigs will rust, the pipelines will fall silent, and the empire of black gold will fade into memory. But Nigeria's story will not end there, for even now, in crowded tech hubs and quiet villages, another generation is rising. They do not dream in barrels, they dream in code, in sun, in wind, in a future where wealth is not pulled from the ground, but built with ideas. The age of black gold made Nigeria powerful. The age to come may finally make all free.